All right, and we are live. Thanks everyone for joining in. This is the Node.js Foundation Community Committee meeting for April 13th, 2017. This is our inaugural meeting, which is pretty awesome, yay. In attendance, we have a couple of people. We have William Kapke, we have Tracy Hines, we have Rachel White, Miles Borens, and JP, forgive me, I don't remember your full name off the top of my head.
JP Wesseling. That's a very Dutch name.
That's right. I remember now. My apologies.
Just a quick note, sorry, while we're calling for who's present, I need edit access to the doc.
Oh, yeah. Let me do that right now. Sorry, folks. One moment. Okay, I don't seem to have your email in my list. Tracy, can you drop it in the chat? That won't show up in the broadcast, I don't think.
Sure.
If not, you can also DM me and all the various ways we're connected. Oh, actually, I take it back. I have the request for access here. I was just looking in the wrong place. Okay, 1 second. I have so many different email addresses, and most of them are linked, but they're not. Okay, almost there.
I'm sorry, y'all. I didn't notice I didn't have that edit access until now.
Yeah, I should have thought to check that too. That's also my bad. This is an issue that we run into with TSC meetings from time to time. Okay, you should have access now.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we haven't had any previous meetings, so there are no previous meeting notes to review, but in future meetings, this would be kind of the first thing we start off with, is a review of the previous meeting. After that, we can sometimes some groups will do sort of just like a roundtable where we just give individual updates, things we have done, related. Some groups have also stopped doing that, so this is something we can decide. Is this something that we want to do as a group? We can also skip. We'll skip it for this meeting, but it's just something to keep in the back of your head so we can figure out if that's something we want to do. Go ahead and jump straight into the agenda. So we have 5 items on the agenda, which are in the Google Doc and also in the meeting issue. So the first one, let's take a look at number 30, which is elect a chairperson. William, you filed this one and you're familiar with this. Would you like to sort of set the stage for this and kind of what we are looking for with this?
Sure. So now that we're chartered, part of the charter says that there is a chair, and the chair is mostly responsible for putting together agendas and hosting the meeting. And I don't know, is there anything else that the chair is responsible for? I mean, kind of the overall, I don't know the right word to use for it. I'm blanking. But control of what's going on around the committee, I guess, organization of the committee.
Yeah, in practice, you definitely nailed it. This role is responsible for setting the agenda, chairing meetings. Effectively, the role I'm taking on today, I seem to recall there's other things in the documentation that they're supposed to do that in practice never happen in meetings.
Yeah, I would also say that they're probably, I need to read back into it, but coordinating with the individual directors, since they go to the board representing the committee,
Yeah.
So close communication.
So unlike the technical steering committee, which has a dedicated person to sit on the board, this committee uses the individual directors, which is myself and Ashley Williams, as the representatives to the board.
Yeah, so the chair will be a smaller role. So something I think I'll propose that we do is, let's all think about if this is a role that any of us are interested in, and then maybe announce that we're interested in possibly applying for this role in that issue, and then maybe in the next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks, we can kind of come back around to that and either have a discussion around it to sort of clarify things, or go ahead and hold a vote if we feel like we're ready to hold a vote. How does that sound to everyone?
Sounds great. I want to nominate you for the chair.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I know that one's kind of procedural, not particularly interesting, but
yeah, you're
cool.
right. We probably should have, like, in this issue, just kind of be a little clearer about the role, just so that if anybody does want to chime in and they weren't able to attend the meeting, that we can communicate that.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, I'll take that on as an action item to expand. Okay, so moving on to the next. Rachel, I know you have to leave, so we'll go and do this real quick, and we'll let you speak first. Let's skip down to number 13, which is add some scope and stake your claim.
Cool.
Another one I opened.
Yeah, so William opened it. I went through and I commented, and I don't remember what I commented 5 minutes ago, but I think I want education, code to learn, evangelism, and is there one other one in there I put?
Inclusivity.
Yeah, and inclusivity. I would love to help out with those.
So, yeah, the discussion that has kind of been floating around so far as to what would happen with these is, like, those groups would need to elect to say, oh, we're better off over there. So I mean, I built the list on getting some ideas for what we thought belonged in a community committee or under a community committee and would maybe thrive better there. Who knows? And then, if people say, yes, evangelism sounds like it really belongs there, then start a dialogue. But if people are saying that doesn't sound right, then we wouldn't bother them.
Yeah, and the one thing there is, I think that those are, yeah, I like these, and I think this is a task that we should definitely move forward on. But yeah, ownership is definitely a thing that we have to be really, it's definitely an outreach to people who are working on them, just for interest, to gauge interest. It's not to say, like, we want to invite you to be in this organization. It's, hey, like, we're here, we're working on this. If you think that it would be a good fit for you guys, like, come and attend the meetings and let's think about it. Code and Learn is probably the only one that I can see that might be, I don't even think there'd be resistance to it so much as sort of like joint ownership, because it's a great event, and events generally don't fall or haven't traditionally fallen under, like, TOC domain. But because it is, until now at least, teaching core, it's something that I think that is, like, really, really important to people working in those groups. So it'd be a cool conversation to have.
When I opened that and I built my list, I kind of went through and evaluated, is this something where someone is contributing code, or is this a community-based thing? And of course, I've expressed a few times that I don't have this mindset of an us and them, because hopefully there's so much overlap that everybody's just attending the same meetings, just under different names, and little different topics. And so my hope would be several of the core people will actually, be within the community committee, and therefore Code and Learn would, just be the same people. because I think if you're trying to draw those adjacent lines to things, I mean, everything focuses around Node, you know, and they're all going to be somewhat attached. So it makes it very, for me, if it's not like a code thing or a community thing, I didn't know where else to draw some kind of line.
Yep, and ultimately we are drawing lines here, lines over something that is really more of a spectrum. Like, and it's the same thing between the TSC and the CTC. What belongs in each. It's usually obvious, but not always. That'll be the same thing here.
So is the situation here like all of these separate groups aren't necessarily a part of anything at the moment? They're just kind of standalone, and we're trying.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good question for context. Is that so historically speaking, and I think Brian and William would be able to probably speak to this better. Is that GitHub, things that were in the Node org in GitHub were the TSCs just because like that was their domain, was sort of code in GitHub. But because we do so much in GitHub, community organizing, governance, it's grown to be a lot more than just like core and working groups that are only committing code. So that's just been an ongoing conversation about scope with everyone.
So it would kind of be if all of these are, if people that were contributing to it previously are interested in working under the community branch, they would just kind of be like subcommittees of a committee.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, William.
I was going to say we either call them working groups or teams, but yes. And really, what this really comes down to is each one of these would have to decide like, what would this this parent body like do for me versus the other one. And in some of them, it might be completely nothing. Like maybe the help repo will get nothing from the community committee. I don't know. It will get
one thing that I can throw out really quickly, Rachel, that like may be useful just to think about like how this works. Like a great example is we have the LTS team, which isn't even a chartered working group, which technically like falls under the purview of like CTC or release or something, but they get a ton of work done. And then like we're wanting to do more stuff related to backports right now. So we kind of spun out like an interest group / team. That whole process took like 5 minutes. There was no paperwork. It was mostly just the fact that there was people that were interested that wanted to do the work. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but just as like a prior art, it's like proven really easy and, for lack of a better term, agile for collected groups of people who have similar interests to just start doing stuff.
Okay. So who is going to be the deciding factor for these groups? Because I guess, is it going to be the majority of the already existing contributors? Because I was like looking through a bunch of them, and there's some that haven't been touched in a fairly long chunk of time.
Well, that's kind of another reason why I made that issue is my hope is that if it's under a different group that's has more people that are not so much in the technical code, that they might give them, give it more attention and maybe clean up things and go through them, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say, yeah, and the only kick with that is if we have to find someone who like, it's either like so dead that everyone, anybody is just like, yeah, just, have it if you want to revive it, but like it's yours. Or otherwise it's sort of like, do we do anything with it? Like, do we ask if there's no one to get permission from for it to be a part of the community committee? Is there anybody to work on it?
Cool. On that note, I have to go for today, so I'll read the minutes later.
Okay. Hi, Rachel. I enjoyed just missing you.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I mean, so going back to that question, from a purely technical, or well, I guess procedural standpoint, as far as like who has the final say on it, or who makes the final decision, in the case of working groups, it is that working group that makes the decision. Most likely, they would hold a vote. They could do it consensus-driven, but it is ultimately the working group that does it, because the way working groups are chartered is they have autonomy over themselves. But a team is inverse of that, and that teams are not chartered and they don't have autonomy over themselves. So it's whoever they report to, which currently is going to be I believe the CTC. I don't know if it's in all cases, but at least in most. And whichever ones aren't CTC would be a TSC. Now, of course, that's from a procedural standpoint. That's like the really technical. In practice, it's less formal than that.
Inclusivity is the only working group that reports to the TSC, and then all the teams are ad hoc in between. Kind of just undefined.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, I think some of the teams are listed in the TSC charter, because the TSC charter has a list of, like a scope list, or I mean, technically it's a repository list. And I don't know if you could, once again, this is from a purely procedural, what the bylaws kind of thing states. I would assume that teams and repos are assumed to be the same entity, but I'm actually not sure.
Well, it's not a one-to-one mapping, because you can consider like evangelism also has help. So there it's a one-to-many. But for the most part, yes. But everything under the technical side falls under the TSC. So some is delegated to the CTC and then to the team below that. So, I mean, in a generic sense, it all goes to the TSC.
Yeah, I think in practice, the way that we would do this is we just approach the group and be like, hey, is this something you're interested in? And then we can just figure out the details as we go. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
So my question is, like, I'm trying to form action items from this, and like, should we, I don't think I've seen any objections to what's been listed in that issue for like who would be good to reach out to. So should we just roll with who's listed, or should we solidify that list first and then do outreach? I'm fine with like just reaching out to everyone, because I really didn't see an objection.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think at this point we should just reach out, file an issue in all of the repos, and see what they say.
Cool. We don't really. So Brian, you said you do the last one. Is there anyone who would like to help work on that outreach for groups? I could ask Rachel if I could sign her up later. I'll ask Rachel if she wants to help me with that.
All right, sounds good. All right, so I think that's about everything from this issue. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Anyone else want to pitch in before we move on to the next item? All right, so next up, going in order on issues, is going to be number 28, Collaborators Summit Agenda. So we have the Collaborators Summit coming up in Berlin on May 4th and 5th, I think, if I'm remembering that correct off the top of my head. It's right before JSConf EU in Berlin. So previous Collaborator Summits have been really great opportunities, just get everyone in the same room and talking. Sometimes it's easier to sort through stuff. And so there's a request out right now for each working group to submit an agenda. And so we're not a working group, we're of course a top level committee, but same difference. So I think we should come up with an agenda. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we could certainly talk about. So first of all, who is going to be there? I'll be there.
I will be there.
Thanks, I'll be there.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I will be not. I'm gonna be.
No.
I booked holidays like in December, and I completely forgot about the dates for JSConf. So yeah.
What about before or after?
Like I'm leaving for holidays on May 3rd.
I'll be in Berlin on the 1st if you want to hang out for May Day.
Oh, don't tempt me! Don't tempt me. I'm not promising anything. What? Don't do this to me. Okay.
All right, we'll miss you there. Yeah, we'll do what we can. There's obviously going to be a lot of people missing there. Anyone have any thoughts, at least right now, on what we'd like to talk about? Or does anyone have any thoughts on how we go about creating agenda? Like, what kind of outreach we want to do on GitHub?
I think that it would be good for, since everyone's going to be in one place, that the items on our agenda especially focus on things that are cross collaboration, which I think is a lot of what we're doing right now anyway. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not agenda for the meeting, but more like a goal for while we're at Collab Summit, which is to like get everybody on board with feeling like they are a part of community committee instead of a part of like another group.
Yeah, I hope we can definitely have more inclusivity, diversity talks.
Mm.
Moderation is always an interesting one to try and tackle, and it seems like probably a good time for that.
Yeah, I think that that would be especially good one to have everyone in the same room. William, I think that that's a really good idea because like moderation especially is one of those things where I think we're like kind of outgrowing. We're getting a little too big for our britches in terms of like what moderation currently covers, just in terms of like places like GitHub, and that we just need to get people like thinking about how where else it should cover, and like how we can all help.
And I can, if, someone else here might be better to say whether it's relevant, but just what kind of community things we're looking at working in, whether it's Node School and those type of organizations. That's always been part of community committee's role, is to interface there, right?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, another one that I had that was kind of it would be more of like a planning thing than like a roadmappy thing. And I've talked to a few people about it, but it's the idea that I kind of consider, and I keep making this jokey phrase, but I kind of consider community committee like the Walmart greeters of Node. And so as part of that, I want to figure out how we can do sort of like a meta collaboration, like intro to contribution session at the fall Node Interactive. So like when you think about something like Code and Learn, it's very specific to core, which I think, I've been talking to folks about opening that up a bit. But after in the afternoon, when we do Code and Learn, that's the beginning of Collaboration Summit, but there's a lot of people who like, they can't just walk over to a table and say hi. They've never participated and it's really intimidating. So what I thought would be really neat is the idea of having an intro session that afternoon, which is, oh, like, are you interested in a working group, but you don't know anybody and you don't know how? Like, let's walk through that instruction and see how you get started in that. And maybe like, let's walk through like what they've been working on, and then we'll go introduce you to those group of folks. Because in person, it's really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So just like summarizing as a bullet point, would you say that this is like finding a way to sort of bridge the gap and help people go from Code and Learn to Collaborator Summit?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'd be a great agenda item. And also, William, to your point, I also thought it was a really great idea to look at, how are we going to interface with other communities, NodeBots, Node School, things like that. Like, what does that look like? How do we approach? And we can keep brainstorming ideas in the agenda issue as well. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas people have had? Or any ideas on how we can kind of go about structuring this agenda a little more?
Yeah, I think what I want to do is also consider a little bit of people kind of figuring out like if there is such a thing as a roadmap, like what that looks like. Like if we're talking about like the current state of community and the future of it, like what do we want to dream up? Like we can't get bananas about it, but sort of like I think that that's not a bad thing to have, but that's definitely like a very uncompy session.
Yeah, I like that too. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right, so let's take a look at number 21 next. So this is governance who has voting rights. So this is a very sort of in the weeds procedural question. I'm looking back over it right now. Jeremiah filed it initially. And so it's like, who has voting rights? Within the charter, there was the concept of two separate people, if I remember this correctly. There was like members of the committee and then advisors on the committee. And those advisors come from these external groups. And so it was a question of like, is it advisors and members, or is it just members? Tracy, do you have any insight into that? Since I know you worked on that.
So I think that the discussions that I had with people before we locked that down was one, that this could be really complicated and it may have needed to, like, that was sort of like the first workshopped approach. So it could be refined as well. But the idea was that like we have a bunch of members because we have a ton of people in like it should be like more of the like user land side of Node. And community events, and that the advisory group has voting rights because they're supposed to be like folks who have been selected to represent those groups. Sort of along the lines of, I think, of like what the CTC is trying to move towards, where you have like each working group or event or like group of people like Node School and Node Girls and Node Bots and these large projects have a person that they have selected to sort of send as a representative. And so like actually dictating a process for that selection is really tough because elections in that way, like we as a group right now, like an election of electing a group of advisors would be really weird because there's only like 12 of us, right? Like even on this repo. So, maybe that was premature in terms of like figuring that out because then like we currently don't have an advisory group, so voting can't happen until that occurs. And maybe we like change this to say like in 6 months time, we go back to that method because we don't actually have enough people to really make sense of that yet. But yeah, like the issue with like you're not going to dictate to outside community groups how they're selecting a representative. So that was like the biggest challenge in that there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. So would we say that for the time being, we should probably say put this issue on hold? We'll revisit it once we are actually reaching out to these communities and we have more concrete details, I guess, to point at and discuss.
Yes, as long as that's something that we're able to do. Like I don't, the biggest concern I have is if there is, if like what you were saying is like consensus is fine. If we actually have to come to a vote and we don't have a group of people who are allowed to vote, that would be a problem. So I think it's good to put it on hold for now, but we definitely, I can look into this further, which is, and I'm sorry I didn't get to do that before this meeting, is sort of figuring out like how long this can be put on hold and whether this just needs to be amended.
Okay, sounds good to me.
William, you have any ideas there?
Well, I mean, for the time being, the members that are currently listed have voting rights is the short answer. And so I guess we need to discuss like what these external groups are and how they want to weigh in on different things, right? But as far as changing it, easy enough. Run it through the board, get it approved.
Oh, wait, so the members, both the advisory group and the members have voting rights?
Oh, we were uncertain about that.
I thought it was just the advisory.
I was thinking it was just members or maybe both. And another question that Jeremiah brought up is, do we need to have this distinction between the two? Would it be easier just to have members of the committee that are from those projects and like just serve unofficially in that role? Or is it better to have that as like a formalized thing where they can, I guess these individuals can be recognized as, representing those groups?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I honestly think that I pre-optimized, I over-engineered this for something that like didn't need to happen yet. Because yeah, I mean, that's a good point, is do we really need to have a distinction? Or do we even need like one not having, like, should we just have members voting?
I mean, I could see ways in which it would be advantageous potentially, but I don't know, maybe for the time being, we just start off with getting people involved as members a little ad hoc, and then we can formalize and figure out as we go.
Okay, so do I need to PR that to get board approval? Because that would be a change to the governance.
What specifically are you looking to change?
I mean, I have to look into it, but I thought that the voting rights were for advisory members. And if we're talking about not needing advisory members yet, then like, are we going against our own rules?
I mean, what I see, and I could be wrong because I'm just scanning to refresh my memory, is just that we want to have advisors and they will represent on the community committee. It doesn't necessarily say they are, it says a collaborator within the community project. So I don't know, it seems unclear. But I don't, if you know of a section where it says more where advisors have like different roles or anything else.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like to me we need to take some time to really understand where we're at right now, kind of what the existing charter says in regards to like advisors versus members and voting, things like that, and really digest it. And then once that's done, we can figure out steps forward.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I think there's probably two parts to this. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we decide to go with just bringing everyone on as members for now. I think the big question around that is, if we leave the charter as is, would we be violating that charter in terms of voting? If not, then I think it's probably fine just to leave it as is, even if we don't, if we're not necessarily exercising parts of the charter. I think that's fine. It might be easier than actually making a change right now. But we need to make sure that we're in compliance. That's probably one of the biggest things. So as far as who will take that on, I could take it on. William, I know this is also kind of one of your specialties. Is this something you would like to look into?
Sure, yeah.
And you can feel free to ping me about it if there's like something stupid vague, because I was.
Well, I mean,
sleep deprived, but yeah.
I'll basically be pinging you to find out like where you see conflict here, because I'm looking at this and I don't see anything that looks confusing about advisors, so I'm probably just missing it.
Okay, no, or I may have written it in and then deleted it before it was published, so.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, any final thoughts before we move on to the next issue? All right, so the last issue on our agenda is number 11. This is a central communication medium for chatting in Node.js. And I tagged this one as CC agenda, but there's a couple of related ones that I think also fit within this discussion. So there's the question itself of where should we hold more real-time like collaboration? So the proposal is either IRC or Slack. There's been discussion of a few others. So it's a question of which technology should we choose? And there's a lot that goes into that decision from around like, ease of access, moderation, and all sorts of things like that. And there's also a related question of how do we actually make the decision? Like, what's the procedure for making that decision? How do we vote on this? And so I just kind of tagged those because I thought they could be good things to put on the agenda, but I didn't have any specific ideas of what we would discuss on that. I don't know, Tracy, you want to start by maybe just filling in where we're at on that?
Yeah, we're totally stuck in the part where we figure out the logistics of the voting mechanism because, I mean, this is my personal feel, which is there are 3 groups that need to voice input on this as distinct groups, and that is moderators from our community as one group, the TSC as another group, and then the last group is community at large. And that's a particularly tough group to get feedback from because it ends up being like very much our networks, like whoever's participating in these initiatives. So that can be really tough. But what really I just want to see, like whether it's a Google form where people aren't having to like share publicly their vote. I don't want to use existing tools that we've used from the foundation in the past for voting. I'd like to make it as simple as possible, but I do also want to be transparent so that if we get that feedback, we can say like, let's bring everybody together and they feel comfortable with us coming to that agreement, right? Because we can't force anyone. This is like ultimately the biggest challenge is that you can't force anybody. Like if the TSC, like folks in the TSC who have been working on things for a long time don't want to move over to whatever decision's been made, they don't feel comfortable that that's like a good decision, they aren't going to do it. And that lack of buy-in is tough. And the same thing goes for existing moderators. And there's a lot of feelings on that. So I do think that
So here's, oh, go for it, Miles.
Yeah, just a really quick one on this. Are you sure that the TSC is the appropriate people to be asking on this? It seems to me that that would be more of a CTC matter since they're the ones who are actually collaborating on technical issues.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah.
Not to like kind of knit on that, but that would be like an important differentiation in my mind.
Okay, so who are we making this decision for is one of the things I'm wondering myself. Because if we're making it for the community, that's one decision. If we're making it for the collaborators, that's another. So what I've noticed is that the collaborators that want to help on IRC and answer things like in the Node.js channel, they do. Some just sit in the Node dev channel and answer some things there, and that's fine. And they, in general, a lot of them communicate between each other there. But if we're talking about more of the 7 million Pi, 7 million users of ours, that's kind of a different story. And I think a lot of this discussion has been blurred between which target here we're talking about. And as we can see here in that thread, there's already a Slack community out there, thousands of people on there. I'm not sure if it's over 2,000 or not, but a lot of people there. In numbers, probably now close to the same as what's in IRC. And so, I mean, at one level, I say, why not have both and just let both exist? And a lot of that comes down to the other group of people, the moderators. So our volunteers, who are just volunteers, they don't have to do anything. If they want to only be in IRC, then that's, we can't make them go elsewhere, and that's bottom line. Maybe we have IRC moderators that say, I don't want IRC. It's not something I'm into, and they want to be on Slack only. Your ability to moderate there is certainly limited. But I think that adds the complication of this story of who is the person speaking and what is their target of concern. like their target audience.
Yeah, so those are excellent points, William. This idea clearly came out of the result of my research for the inclusivity strategy. And so that was supposed to be more targeted at the community at large. And a lot of people, even from our survey in the winter, said that like just the quality of communication, both in IRC and Slack, are not good. And so what I think needs to happen, and I don't think that it negates these other things existing, is that we do have to finally choose, like not choose like for something to die out, but to invest more energy into one area, right? We're trying to recruit new moderators. So if existing moderators in an IRC space, you know what I mean? Like if they don't want to moderate whatever we choose to go to, that's fine. We have a group of people who have said that they'd like to help.
In the end, it comes down to who the foundation and collaborators, which platform they're endorsing. And we focus our conversations and moderation efforts towards. Because in no scenario here will the Slack group go away. I mean, it's not even a foundation thing. It's I'm forgetting his name, but yeah, he set it up on his own. Has just been running it on his own.
Yeah, Alex, I think.
Justin, I think it is. Maybe.
Yeah, Alex is helping out with it.
Can I throw something out there? And feel free to shut this down if you think it's a tangent, but perhaps the whole Slack versus IRC thing itself is a red herring.
I think
Slack and IRC, pardon?
I think that actually, I do.
Slack and IRC are an interface, but the complaint that we have is like maybe there's a bit of a complaint about onboarding, kind of, but I'm not really seeing that as like the major complaint. The major complaint is like people want better support. And honestly, I'm not convinced that either Slack or IRC are either, like better for support. We can talk about like user experience of Slack obviously winning out on IRC, or the openness and accessibility of IRC winning out over Slack, the open source nature of things in Slack, like all these other things. None of these actually have to do with the core issue, which is like, how are we properly supporting our community? And I think that even the moderation thing that we're talking about doesn't really cover this. Like, as long as we still just have this consistent stream of text that is the main interface that people are using to try to get support, we're going to run into the same problems. Like, to me, I'm starting to think it's like, do we need a ticketing system? Do we need like proper support reps? Like, I'm thinking about this almost more like a company right now, and maybe that's not really feasible for us to do as a project. But like, if the problem is truly support, not a problem of like, do we have a community? Obviously, we have a massive IRC community and we have a massive Slack community, and both of them are happy in their environments and able to be communities. But the complaint, in my opinion, is inconsistent support.
I do think that the support is a part of it that hasn't been discussed, but I don't think that that's exclusively the problem. I think it is also community. Like, we have people who are breaking off into these smaller sections because they don't feel like either of those are not places that people are hanging out and like shooting the shit. And maybe that's okay because it's too big. Like, maybe that's just not something that we can solve.
But I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, and I think you like hit the nail on the head. It's like, the problem that I think is important for us to solve is not like telling people where to build their communities. It's like, when people need help from the project, how do we have a defined, clear way for people to get that support? Like, people spin up other communities all the time.
Well, we do actually have something that's a virtual ticketing system, and that's the help repo. And my view is that it's been fairly successful. I mean, it gets a lot of attention, and the collaborators are definitely jumping in there and helping people out. It's just not real time, right?
Is there a hook from the help into one of the existing IRC channels?
No. Not right now, as far as I know, but there's no reason why we couldn't.
Right. Yeah, this is what I'm sort of saying. If you're talking about that, then we need to, if we're talking about like investing more in support, then that's exactly what we would want to do, especially if we're trying to bolster help. I've been trying to send more people there And if we do have a little bit more, I also do think that GitHub is not a place for conversation. I know that it has a commenting system, but like that is not a real time, like that is not a, it is not necessarily conducive to having a conversation about something that you're struggling with. And so I do think that like a chat mechanism needs to be in place as part of that.
I mean, I also don't think that IRC is the place for sharing code. I mean, when you're there, you just always link off to something else, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
Is Slack better for sharing code?
yeah, a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, you can do code snippet stuff and links, but
I think a link to like a gist on GitHub is like just as effective of like as like whatever embed thing that you get through Slack, personally. But
sure, but then people aren't seeing it in the chat room unless they have an IRC GUI that allows for that.
mm-hmm.
Right.
No, but even with like the like inside of the GUI of Slack, like you have to click on something, right? To like
use the code fences, it'll show pretty decent in line.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, honestly, this is where help in being on GitHub is even more superior than either option, in my opinion.
What? In what sense? That's
So
what I'm saying. Like, I don't think that help is sufficient with just being in GitHub.
What help does is allow someone to formulate their problem and put it out there, and it also works a little bit better for our around the world group of collaborators, so that they can get to it when they get to it. Whereas these other chat programs, it scrolls back in history, and then if somebody wasn't happened to be paying attention at the time, it's just missed.
Is there a way that we could hook into help on our like Node.js website? Maybe make like an app that hooks into help so that people can actually request.
I see what you're saying, though. I see what you're saying. So this is sort of something that I was having a conversation about this week. So you still have to treat one as the source of truth. And in this sense, William, yes, help should be the source of truth. But what I'm saying is there should be a hook into IRC or whatever chat mechanism we're doing so that you can have a real-time conversation if you need to. But ultimately, that needs to be pasted back into the issue so that other people can come back to it and see that and learn from it. Because it should be like almost like Stack Overflow in the sense that like you can reference it later. The problem is once you close that stuff, it's also harder to surface.
I guess this also then what you're kind of leading into there is more of like micro help versus a macro help or something. Because simply pinging Miles on IRC, I can say, hey, Miles, are you joining this meeting? Which is a tiny little statement. I wouldn't open a help issue for that. Whereas like a lot of problems that I see in IRC or Slack, and someone's trying to work through something, and it's a the real-time feedback is helpful if say someone's at work and they happen to get somebody knowledgeable on IRC. I've seen it go back and forth and they get through their problem. And they get there. It's just lots of lines of text going back and forth describing their problem and trying different things that gets lost in the history. So all I'm really leading into is there's pros and cons of both. But at the micro level, the real time is certainly far superior to just send a quick message, quick question.
Yeah. I like being. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Miles.
I was going to say this is actually strangely one of the things that IRC could have a lower barrier of entry for than Slack. And I'm going to wear the fact that I'm an IRC person on my sleeves while I'm saying this, but like we can have like a one-click link that people can click on that brings them into a web-based IRC chat that's in a specific channel, and they just plug in a username and go. Whereas like if someone is not in the Slack yet and you want to onboard them for a quick chat out of help, you've got to invite them, then they've got to sign up, then they've got to go through like that tutorial that you always get that you close, then put in their name, and like it's like 10 steps as opposed to a click.
I'm with you 100% on that. It is definitely a barrier to getting in there. And that's why I say, like, there are people that want both. There's the person that's like, I will continue to have questions, so I'm willing to do that onboarding. And there's the other people that want to just jump in and don't know if they'll ever come back for a question again. So like, I just see pros and cons of both.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do think is worth considering, and like Tracy, I think you're onto something here about the moderation and about these different spaces. And I think maybe what people are, at least I won't put words in other people's mouth. My kind of feeling about it though is I don't want to tell people where to be collaborating if they have spaces that they're comfortable in. You know, like people will want to go to just about all these different places. But at the same time, like we don't want to be sending people to spaces that are known to be unsafe, or sending people to spaces that are not moderated or properly maintained. So like maybe there's like a halfway point here where I'm just going to throw out like a make-believe thing that maybe doesn't make sense. But if the foundation, for example, ran moderator training, and if you had a space that's a community for Node.js people, you could go to the foundation or to the CommComm and be essentially have your moderators trained and essentially have like kind of a stamp of approval that this is like a sanctioned space for the Node.js community. Like we can kind of invert it, and rather than trying to like control these spaces, we can kind of let them proliferate as they want and just like kind of sign off. Like I think of like WeAllJS, for example, as just one. Is like that's a very specific community that really wants things a certain way, and there's no reason that like we shouldn't be able to like come to an agreement. Now they have no interest in putting that stamp on their Slack, but like just from a higher level, I'm trying to think of like maybe the solution that we need to solve is just like kind of like a step higher than like the granularity of telling people where to go.
Like node certified communication channels.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
well, that was the whole point of this, right? I
just
need to be able to send people to safe places.
Yeah, exactly. So then we can just have a list of places that are guaranteed safe because we've worked with the people who are running them. And then that like is very much like small core, like let the community build their spaces.
All right, we have 1 minute remaining here. I don't know if we're going to do public Q&A. Glancing in there, I see there are a few insensitive comments, perhaps, and somebody asking if they should learn Node.js or Go. Of course, we're going to say you should learn Node.js.
Go if it's the appropriate thing for what you're doing.
Yes, they are both tools, and they have good reasons for each. Do we want to wait for any additional questions or anything like that? We want to continue on past, and I just have to drop off.
I think just to wrap that one up, I just want to make sure note-wise. So action item for that, would it be to make this suggestion that, or is it to like drop the idea of voting for this thing and say like let things be things, but we would like to make an official code of conduct compliant list of places that we can send folks to? And that we also want to build up this idea of having like a support system via like help being a really great place that people are investing in, but we also want it to have some way to like hook back into IRC or Slack that exist already.
I think all of those things, yes. Something else I would also add is I think it'd be a good exercise to really go through and document specifically what problems we are trying to solve and kind of what are the various nuances to them. You know, basically the things we've been talking about in this discussion. Because I think that will help guide some of these decisions on how we approach them. So like talking about support and like how this is a really key part of our communication strategy. But you know, there's other aspects too, is like you know, creating safe spaces and you know, making sure that we have moderators on hand. So that talks about like moderator training, and you know, just maybe like going through and like documenting these things that we are looking for and that we're interested in. I think would be a good step too.
I think the moderation training thing should be something we should talk about at the Collab Summit as well.
Oh yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's definitely get that on there.
Okay, I have to drop off, unfortunately. Bye.
Cool. All right. Thanks, William.
All right. Bye, William.
Thank you.
All right. So I think that's any other final comments on that issue before we close out the meeting?
Hi, Michelle. I was going to say Michelle joined us a little bit late, but Michelle, I don't know if y'all have had the pleasure of meeting her, but she runs Node Girls out of London and is all around rad.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle.
Yeah, sorry I'm a bit late. I mixed up my time zones, but I made it.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, even if it was just at the end. And yeah, time zones are always fun.
Yeah, got some good discussions at the end though. Like it.
So Michelle, I'm just going to let you know as an aside, and it's kind of unrelated, but I will be in London for a week in July.
Cool.
So feel free to reach out. My contact information is pretty easy to rummage up, but if you can't find it, Tracy knows how to get a hold of me, and maybe we can organize something if there's like a talk or a workshop or whatever I can do.
Oh yeah, I will be there as well. Totally. Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
That same week? Oh yeah. Cool.
Cool.
All right, cool. So I think for me, I will take these notes and the to-dos and distribute them to the proper issues. And then for publishing these notes, do we just publish them to the repo, Brian?
We do. If you want, I can take that on. We don't have any of that infrastructure in place yet, but I'll just mimic what we do in the TSC.
Awesome. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a nice day. Nice to see you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Bye-bye. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.